Welcome everyone to this webinar from Myth to Manuscript, exploring Inklings archival collections. My name is Barnaby Hughes, metadata editor at Atla and production editor Atla Open Press. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the next few days on the Atla webinar page at atla.com/webinars. And we will also post the presentation slides. Today, we have representatives from various university libraries and archives holding some of the most important Inklings collections. First up is Ashley Chu, Senior Director of Academic Affairs and University Archivist at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana. With Joe Rick, she co-edited The Faithful Imagination, papers from the 2018 Francis White Eubank Colloquium on C.S. Lewis and Friends. We also have Bill Fliss, who is the manuscripts archivist at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where his duties include curating the J.R.R. Tolkien collection. In 2022, he co-curated a major museum exhibition titled J.R.R. Tolkien, The Art of the Manuscript. Catherine McIlwain is the Tolkien archivist at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where she has worked on the Tolkien archive since 2003. With Richard Ovenden, she co-edited The Great Tales Never End, Essays in Memory of Christopher Tolkien. And she's also the author of Tolkien, Maker of Middle-earth, and curated the Bodleian Summer Exhibition of the same name in 2018. Laura Stanifer and Jill Walker both work at the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Laura is the archivist and Jill is the catalog librarian. There will be time for questions after the presentations, but feel free to type them as you think of them in the Q&A window rather than in the chats, and we will address them later. Without further ado, let's get started.
Barnaby, before we begin, I see our head of metadata, Jill Anito, has her hand raised. Jill, did you want to add something before we begin? Oh, never mind. Ashley, go ahead.
All right, I cannot start my video, so if you want to start it, host, that is great. If not, I will just proceed. Greetings. Oh, I guess I can start my video now. Wonderful. Perfect. Greetings, my name is Ashley Chu, and I'm the University Archivist and Senior Director of Academic Affairs at Taylor University. Taylor is located in East Central Indiana, and we are proud to be a top Christian liberal arts college in the Midwest. Today, I'm excited to share a glimpse into our Inklings special collection and some of the unique treasures housed in archives and special collections here at Taylor. The Inklings collection was established in 1997, thanks to a generous gift that allowed us to acquire about 300 Inklings-related items originally collected by Dr. Edwin Brown, an Indiana physician and avid Inklings enthusiast and collector. We were introduced to the collection through one of our mathematics professors, Dr. David Neuhauser, who was a George MacDonald scholar and was connected with Brown through this shared interest in the Inklings. Neuhauser actually used to take students on field trips to Brown's residence so that they could see this fine collection. We were so excited to have the opportunity to bring it to Taylor in 1997 so that others could interact with these materials. And this initial acquisition comprises the named Brown collection within our holdings. Since then, through donations and targeted funding, what is now known as the Inklings Special Collection has more than tripled in size. Today, it includes books, manuscripts, letters, periodicals, photographs, and artifacts focusing on 5 primary authors: C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, Dorothy L. Sayers, Charles Williams, and Owen Barfield, along with a few works by J.R.R. Tolkien and other contemporaries. Our collecting priorities are first and early editions of the author's works, and our acquisition strategy aligns with this focus. The purpose in maintaining this collection at Taylor is to encourage the discovery and use of these materials and to promote the integration of faith, scholarship, and creativity that this group of authors modeled so well. I'm excited to showcase a few of the most popular and special items in our collection. It was really difficult to decide which few to highlight, and it was really hard not to get all of these items out and show them to you today, but alas, time does not permit it. Lewis and MacDonald are our largest author collections, and we're pleased to house nearly all of their first editions in both British and American printings, many still with original dust jackets. One special item is a signed dedicatee copy of Lewis's George MacDonald anthology, dedicated to Mary Nyland, who was a former student of Lewis's at Magdalen College at Oxford, and credits him as the person who brought her to faith. This particular copy belonged to her and is inscribed to her by Lewis, and it is the tan book near the top of the photo between the blue and red covers. Another treasure is Joy Davidman's personal copy of Mere Christianity. Davidman was an American poet and writer who married Lewis and sadly passed away shortly after their marriage. This copy of Mere Christianity is inscribed by Davidman, indicating that the book was given to her by Lewis. It is the blue book near the top of the photo that is resting on the foam cradles. We also have a unique handwritten Lewis manuscript titled Light, later published as The Man Born Blind, and you can catch a glimpse of it in the middle of the photo on the left-hand side next to the blue manuscript. Moving into our other collected authors, we're thrilled to have a George MacDonald manuscript that is incredibly unique. It is a copy of a standard publication of Shakespeare's Hamlet that has been unbound, interleaved with blank pages, and rebound. And this indicates MacDonald's review of the manuscript as he prepared for lectures and eventually his own published study of the text in 1885. You'll catch a glimpse of this one in an upcoming slide. Another highlight is Dorothy L. Sayres's Even the Parrot. This is a whimsical social commentary published in 1945 that continues to intrigue students and visitors alike. If you haven't heard of or read this little book yet, it is really about this big. I highly recommend it. And then one item that has received some research and scholarly attention, but we would welcome more, is the Summa manuscript. It is a journal of philosophical debate and conversation between Owen Barfield and C.S. Lewis prior to Lewis's conversion. It's sometimes referred to as the Great War manuscript. We're eager to digitize the Summa in the near future so that it can be better utilized by researchers while maintaining its preservation. You can see this manuscript in the photo. It is the one with the dark blue shiny cover just above the framed sketch. Promoting engagement with the collection has been a priority since it came under our care several years ago. On this slide are a few ways we're creating opportunities for students, researchers, scholars, and visitors to interact with the materials. Since we are a university, we prioritize student engagement with the collection, and in the next few slides, I'll share some specific examples of recent projects and events. Last year, we developed a new concept of a pop-up exhibit. We conducted these during campus visit days, partnering with admissions and advancement to showcase the collection materials to prospective students and their families, alumni, and donors. You can see on the slide that some of these pop-up exhibits expanded outside of our reading room and utilized space in our university library to draw a larger crowd. Additionally, I recently collaborated with a member of our history faculty to develop a course on the World War I generation that would privilege archival research. Students conducted a research project using the Inklings special collection, and they explored connections between these authors and World War I. They created poster presentations of their findings, a few of which I included on the slide. It was incredible to see their research. This semester, students in a Victorian literature class are completing a rare item analysis on selected works by George MacDonald. This includes books, letters, and periodicals. As you see on the slide, they are fully engaged with the materials in the collection, including deciphering MacDonald's energetic handwriting in the Hamlet manuscript on the right-hand photo. As an archivist, I've found that students are naturally drawn toward physically interacting with materials, and I really enjoy watching them get pulled into this item in their collection with their research. With all of the amazing engagement that we have going on, we also have undertaken and completed some significant back-end work within the last 4 years. My leadership over the Inklings Special Collection began with a restructuring and remodel initiative within the university several years ago that transitioned the collection to archives and special collections for the first time. The collection was relocated to our stacks to improve preservation, organization, and access. We created what we believe to be the first ever inventory of every single item in the collection, established collection policies, and created and made preliminary finding aids available on our website. Just to note that these finding aids, while still available, are sorely in need of an update as they were created before the work I'm about to discuss was accomplished. I have to give a shout out to my friends at the Wade Center who patiently responded to countless questions as I worked to educate myself about this collection and learn best practices for dealing with these types of materials. Their wisdom and experience was invaluable and helped us develop many of the internal processes we have in place today. With the core Inklings Special Collection in order, last year we undertook the huge project of identifying and consolidating Inklings-related books from 4 shelving locations throughout the library. We established the circulating Inklings reading collection located prominently on the main floor of our library, and we identified additional Inklings reference materials in our library's main collection. Along the way, we unexpectedly moved several library books over to the Inklings Special Collection. I was pleasantly surprised and slightly shocked when I discovered a handful of Lewis First editions sitting quietly on the shelves in our main collection. My guess is that these were purchased by the university as new copies at the time of publication, not knowing the immense value they would continue to have decades later. Working closely with our cataloging specialist, we have ensured that each book within these collections is properly cataloged, and our staff and student assistants have worked hard to create label bookmarks and implement a shelving strategy for the collection. We are continuing to acquire materials for the collection through donation and targeted acquisitions that align with our collection development plan to prioritize first and early editions that we do not currently have in the collection. As we continue to grow, we are committed to continuing to advance the collection's discoverability and organization. In archives and special collections, we are continually mindful and attentive to both preservation and access. Now that we've completed the bulk of the work on all the books, we'll turn our attention to other materials like letters, manuscripts, and serials, working to increase internal organization and make them more accessible for researchers. Updating our finding aids and expanding digitization are key priorities, with several manuscripts slated for digitization in the near future. Digitizing these unpublished works that are in fairly fragile states will allow for greater engagement and preservation. Archival work is never truly complete, but it's been a fulfilling and rewarding journey getting to know and working with this collection throughout the past few years. I invite and encourage you to reach out if you're interested in conducting research or simply wish to explore these materials further. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll now turn it over to the next presenter.
Okay, if everyone can hear me, my name is Bill Fliss. I'm the Tolkien archivist at Marquette University. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to talk about our Inklings collection here. Inkling being focused primarily on J.R.R. Tolkien, which is the main focus of our collection here. I'm going to attempt to go through this brief and dirty survey in 10 minutes. We'll see how I go. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your seats. So first of all, to set the context, and I can't seem to... There we go. Okay. So to set the context, I work at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, established late 19th century. We're a Roman Catholic Jesuit university, PhD granting institution, and an R2 research institution, according to Carnegie. Within the campus, I work in the Rayner Library, which is a central building in the campus. And then delving down further, I work in the Department of Archival Collections and Institutional Repository at Marquette. Now, the heart of our collection are the manuscripts that we acquired from J.R.R. Tolkien. We have the original manuscripts for The Hobbit, which was his first published work of fiction, published in 1937. Lesser-known work, Farmer Giles of Ham, His magnum opus, The Lord of the Rings, published in 3 volumes over the course of 1954 and 1955. And last but not least, we have the drawings for Mr. Bliss, illustrated children's book that was unpublished during his lifetime, but it was published in 1982. We also, in addition to these original manuscripts, when I say the manuscripts, we have most of the material that went into the writing of the books. So drafts of chapters, handwritten drafts, typewritten drafts, the galley sheets, page proofs. There are some items related to the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, some scraps that are over at the Bodleian that in Catherine's collection. And we also have a large number of letters from Tolkien, but not as many as Laura has over at the Wade Center, which you'll be hearing about later. Now, a big question that always pops up is why we have this stuff. It's because of the vision of this man, William Reedy, who the new library director at Marquette in 1956, who approached Professor Tolkien and asked if he would sell the manuscripts to Marquette. The moral of the story is that it pays to be the first to ask, and Marquette acquired these manuscripts in the late 50s. They were later added to significantly by his son, Tolkien's son, Christopher, in the 1980s and 1990s. And Reedy sought out and acquired these manuscripts because Tolkien was Catholic, and Reedy had the vision of stocking Marquette's library with the papers of Catholic authors. And so that's why he pursued Tolkien and acquired the manuscripts here. So the manuscripts are the heart of our collection. All told, there are over 11,000 pages of material here at Marquette, and they've drawn researchers here for almost 70 years now. People have visited to take a look at these manuscripts. We also have a large secondary source collection, including some very hard-to-find publications. The picture here is just a tiny fraction of the literally thousands of books about Tolkien that we've acquired. We try to collect most everything published on Tolkien, the good and the bad. And we have everything inventoried on our website, and the vast majority of publications have records in our OPAC. We also have a very large collection of fan magazines, also called fanzines or just zines. This was the way the early fandom communicated in a pre-internet age about their interest in Tolkien. We have over 240 titles going back to the late 50s, coming from 30 different countries. And partially this came out of the attempt to gather secondary source material on Tolkien, because only until relatively recently has Tolkien been acknowledged by the Academy as a subject worthy of serious study. And so a lot of the early scholarship and literary criticism of Tolkien was coming from the fans through fan magazines. So Marquette spent a lot of time collecting these. Now, this effort led organically to have us document the fandom that sprang up around J.R.R. Tolkien. So we also have collected artwork, posters, games, puzzles. We're not a museum, but we do have some Tolkien ephemera, for lack of a better term, that we've acquired. Toys and merchandise, both licensed and unlicensed, have entered our collection. As you can see from the photo, not even the Argonath can hold back the tide of Tolkien, of consumer capitalism. But the manuscripts are the heart of the collection. The image at left really depicts the entire manuscript collection there on the left. I want to briefly highlight 2 interesting projects we've undertaken in recent years. The original manuscripts were retired from use by researchers around 1981, so quite a while ago. The original manuscripts we received from Professor Tolkien were microfilmed, and then Christopher Tolkien's later manuscripts, he sent also photocopies, which is what we had researchers using for a number of years. The system worked, but it was cumbersome, difficult to navigate. You had to go back and forth between microfilm and photocopies. So we embarked on a big project a few years ago to build Anduin. That's our name for a database we've developed, which has scans of all of, right now, the Lord of the Rings manuscripts, but we'll go on to include the other manuscripts as well. And essentially, we've digitally reprocessed the collection using the digital surrogates to make it easier for researchers to navigate and study the manuscripts for the Lord of the Rings, going by chapter, being able to go from earliest draft through to the galley sheets. Tolkien was a fanatical reviser, so there are lots of drafts of different chapters here. And so that's been, it's a database that is used here in the reading room at Marquette. We have records for each folio page. There's metadata that we've developed for it as well to assist people. Right now it's in a beta version. There's additional functionality that we're working on now that we'll incorporate that I could talk more about later. But it does allow people to take a close look at the images. You can blow up, you can rotate, you can study the manuscripts very closely, which is necessary because Tolkien's handwriting is atrocious. So it's very nice to be able to magnify and study these manuscripts. The other major project I want to do a shameless plug for is the Tolkien Fandom Oral History Collection. I collect brief 3-minute testimonies from Tolkien fans. I've collected 1,300 so far from people in 40 different countries. I'll put the link in the chat, but if anybody who's watching this would like to contribute to this, there's no threshold of fanishness one has to meet in order to contribute. But if you'd like to, please get in touch with me and I'd love to add your voice to the collection. I put these online. People can listen to the interviews, the testimonials. I provide a transcript. People can search across the transcripts. And then I put the transcripts and the metadata text into a data set that people can download and apply digital tools if they want to delve more deeply into studying what the fans have to say. It's a very interesting collection. Having the Tolkien collection has brought a lot of opportunities to us. I think it's raised the profile of Marquette University over the years. It's provided an opportunity to collaborate on Tolkien exhibitions with august institutions like the Bodleian Library at Oxford, the BNF in Paris, and the Morgan Library in New York City. We've become a sort of a pilgrimage site for Tolkien fans passing through Milwaukee. So what you see here is an image of our display we keep up year-round of reproductions from the collection for people that are stopping through and want to make some sort of connection. There are some challenges, though, to dealing with this collection. The first is that we don't own the copyright to the manuscripts. That's retained by the Tolkien Estate Limited. So we cannot allow photographs or publication of the manuscripts without their permission. So that has affected what we can do. For example, Anduin, the database, is only accessible and usable to see the images in our reading room. We can't make it available more widely than that. Another second challenge is just finding time to devote to Tolkien. I think this image captures a lot of academic archivists these days. I also manage over 100 other collections here at Marquette, so finding time to work on Tolkien can be a challenge. We've taken a break from being involved in any exhibitions, loans to other institutions. They're very time consuming, even if you're just loaning the material. And I've also abandoned some Tolkien projects that I've started up or thought of over the years just because I just don't have the time to deal with them, or unfortunately, the time to continue with them. And the third challenge is preservation. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote much of The Lord of the Rings during World War I on poor quality paper. And it's clear, and especially in the last 10 or 15 years, that many people throughout the world see the J.R.R. manuscripts here and abroad as world cultural treasures, worthy of being, I think, added to the UNESCO Memory of the World International Register. Maybe that'll happen someday. And so we're very careful about wanting to preserve these. As an image of a conservator who just visited recently to provide advice and examine some of the manuscripts. And in the spring, I'll take steps to improve the long-term care of the manuscripts. That's going to be a major project during the spring. So to summarize, the manuscripts we received from Professor Tolkien are the heart of a much larger collection of Tolkien-related material that has grown organically here since really the 1970s. I have begun collecting the papers of older Tolkien scholars, some of whom came into contact with or researched the wider group of the Inklings. So there may be more Inklings-related materials coming here in the future. And in closing, I would say that Christopher Tolkien's been called the last Inkling. He came late in the history of the Inklings, but he was acknowledged as a member towards the end there. We have our own collection of letters from Christopher Tolkien in our holdings, and I anticipate that more letters from Christopher will arrive here in the future. So to a limited extent, looking forward, I can see the collection here being a collection that reflects, to a limited extent, both the Father and the Son. So that concludes my my comments here. I will pass this along to my friend Catherine at the Bodleian, so she can talk about the treasures there. Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Catherine McElwain. I'm the Tolkien archivist at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. I just thought I'd tell you briefly about the Bodleian and then a bit more about the Inklings collections that we hold. My speciality is the Tolkien, but I'm going to try and cover some of our other Inklings circle as well. So the Bodleian is the library service for the University of Oxford. And it actually comprises 28 different libraries. The main library is the Old Bodleian. This was opened in 1602 by its founder, Sir Thomas Bodley. And in 1610, Bodley made an agreement with the Stations Company in London, which means that from 1610 onwards, Bodleian has been able to claim a free copy of every book that's published in England. So this means that we have a huge collection of printed books, and it's always expanding. There's currently over 13 million printed books, and each week we get about 5,000 new books added to the collection. So wonderful, but also a bit of a storage nightmare. So we long ago ran out of space in the centre of Oxford to store our books, and they're now mostly housed in the collection storage facility, which is a huge warehouse near Swindon, which is about 30 miles from Oxford. And students and staff and researchers can order whatever they like, and it usually comes within half a day or 24 hours at the most. But the special collections that I'm going to tell you about today are housed in the Western Library. This is home of special collections within the Bodleian, and it's in the centre of Oxford and just across the road from the Old Bodleian. We have about 1 million special collection items. Some are stored in the collection storage facility, but the Inklings holdings are stored here in the Western Library. And this is where researchers come to consult the manuscripts in our reading rooms. It's where I'm talking to you from now. And our conservation team and our imaging studio are all based there, so that the special collections don't have to move out of that building. Everything's there for them. So our modern literary manuscripts really reflect the library's collecting policy to collect the papers of authors who have a strong connection to the City of Oxford or the University of Oxford. And the most significant holdings in this respect are those of the Inklings Circle, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Charles Williams. So the Tolkien archive, this is actually an image of a carpet woven in Aubusson in France of Christopher Tolkien's map, familiar to you from The Lord of the Rings. The Tolkien archive is a large archive at the Bodleian. We have over 500 boxes of manuscripts, and we have over 300 books from Tolkien's working library, so the books that he used to consult for his academic work. So many of those volumes are heavily annotated by him, which is very interesting. The archive divides into 4 main series. We have his academic papers. He was Professor of Anglo-Saxon and later Professor of English at Oxford University. We have his literary papers, family papers, and his artwork. And all of those series cover the whole of his adult life. And some of them also include his childhood as well. So it's a really rich resource. There's lots of interesting examples from the archive where we can see Tolkien's worlds intersecting, particularly his academic world and his literary interior life. So I've discovered that there's on his lecture notes for undergraduates on the rather dry subject of the Germanic sound shift. At the top, he's written the opening lines of Beowulf in Elvish. And I think that's just him doodling on his lecture notes. Another researcher who came to the Bodleian discovered that on the back of his introductory remarks on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there was actually a draft of the Council of Elrond from The Lord of the Rings. And that was something that a researcher brought to my attention, which was very exciting. So we can see that Tolkien's literary life and his academic life are coexisting together and overlapping, and that really Middle Earth is never far from his thoughts. C.S. Lewis, we have quite a large collection of C.S. Lewis manuscripts, but it's not a coherent collection like the Tolkien archive. The Tolkien archive came to us from one source, really, the Tolkien family and the Tolkien estate. But C.S. Lewis's manuscripts we've acquired from lots of different sources over quite a long period of time. So we're actively collecting C.S. Lewis material. So we have literary manuscripts such as the manuscript of A Grief Observed and Letters to Malcolm. We also have quite a lot of correspondence from C.S. Lewis, some to his illustrator Pauline Baynes, to fellow Inkling Neville Coghill, to the fantasy author E.R. Edison, some to his friend Arthur Greaves, and even to the publisher Rayner Unwin, and that's a letter about Tolkien's work. We have very little about Narnia, but we do have this C.S. Lewis's draft map of Narnia, which is, yeah, really lovely. He doesn't have the map making skills that Tolkien had, I would say, but it's lovely to have this in his own hands. And we also have a notebook which contains the opening lines of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Earlier this year, the Bodleian did acquire some more C.S. Lewis material. This came to us from Walter Hooper's collection under a scheme in England called Acceptance in Lieu. So when somebody dies and they have very valuable cultural items, to reduce the inheritance tax that would fall on the estate if they give them to a national institution, such as the Bodleian or the British Library or the British Museum, then this reduces the tax bill. We were very lucky to get in Walter Hooper's archive some material of Lewis's. These included books from his library, literary manuscripts, poetry, notebooks, and letters. Some personal objects went to the Story Museum in Oxford rather than to the Bodleian. We did also receive a small number of Tolkien items from the Hooper archive as well. And these included letters, poems, and a runic letter from The Hobbit. We also have the Owen Barfield archive, and this is a cohesive archive that came to us from his grandson and literary executor, Owen Barfield Jr. And this contains appointment diaries, literary manuscripts, working notes, correspondence with friends, colleagues, students, publishers, family photographs, including this one of his daughter, Lucy, and publications. Lucy, you might know, was the goddaughter of C.S. Lewis, who dedicated The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe to her in 1950. Barfield sometimes joined C.S. Lewis and his brother Warney and other Inklings on walking trips, walking holidays. In 1938, the friends, including Barfield and Tolkien, stopped at the Red Lion Hotel, we can see at the top of this notepaper, in Basingstoke, that's south of Oxford. And there, to amuse his friends, Tolkien has scribbled down this spoof exam paper. Some of the questions refer to Barfield's works, The Silver Trumpet and Poetic Diction. Others refer to The Hobbit, which was then newly published. Nearly all the questions were unanswerable, including this one. Estimate, compare, distinguish, discuss, and trace to its principal sources everything. And this paper was found in the Barfield archive. Charles Williams, again, like the C.S. Lewis papers, we have quite a large accumulation of material, but from lots of different sources. So this has been acquired by the library from the 1950s onwards, some donated and some purchased by the library. I'd say in total about 32 boxes, but it isn't a collection in its own right. It's an accumulation. Many of them were given by the recipients. So there's lots of correspondence with various women in his life, including Phyllis Jones, who he called Celia, Anne Rennick, who he refers to as Irene, Phyllis Potter, and Alice Mary Miller, who became Hadfield. And I thought it'd be worth pointing out that there's been some Charles Williams material newly catalogued in 2024, and so only very recently made available to researchers. And this includes 3 boxes of correspondence with the Oxford poet Anne Riddler, a box of literary papers collected by Anne Riddler, including poems, lecture texts, and masques, including The King of the North. Correspondence of Anne Riddler after Charles Williams's death, including with his wife, Florence. A separate collection of letters from Charles Williams to Dorothy Rance, whom he calls Pyrrha. And in some papers of his sister, Edith Williams, that we purchased about 10 years ago, there's a daguerreotype photograph of Charles Williams, aged 6 years old, with his grandparents. So that's all very newly catalogued material. So in conclusion, the Bodleian has significant holdings of the Inklings, particularly the key members, but we do also have papers of Neville Coghill, an Inkling member, and Adam Fox, who's a minor Inkling. I haven't really got time to talk about everyone in this session, but the best place to search for the manuscripts held by the Bodleian is in the Bodleian Archives and Manuscripts. And I should have put the link on this screen, but I can type that in later on. Okay, thanks very much.
Just waiting here for screen permissions to share my PowerPoint. Okay, hopefully everybody can see. We're heading now to the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. This is what our building looks like. And when you can't be in Oxford at Catherine's collection, we want to make you feel like you can be in Oxford with this building that looks like an English stone cottage, because we collect British authors. So we wanted to make the aesthetics part of the design when we moved into this space in 2001. I will also mention our lamppost outside is always on because the one in Narnia is always on. So we wanted to create that little imaginative touch as well. We were founded in 1965 by Clyde S. Kilby, who was an English professor here at Wheaton College. He got to know professors Lewis and Tolkien and a number of the other authors or their family members, and that's really how we started the collection. These are our 2 dream archival staff members. Myself, I've been here since 2005 as archivist, and as archivist, my main priorities are to get new materials for our collection, preserve those materials, and help other people use and access those materials. And then Jill Walker, my colleague who will be presenting after me, has been our catalog librarian since 2019. She has many hats and does many things, but the main focus we'll be talking about today for her work is cataloging our collections, getting them all into our library catalog, and working with our metadata, which can be quite complicated at times. And she'll share more about that when she presents. These are the 7 authors we collect at the Wade Center. We started with C.S. Lewis as a focal point and then expanded that to 6 other authors who knew or influenced him in some capacity. So they are Owen Barfield, G.K. Chesterton, George MacDonald, Dorothy L. Sayers, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Charles Williams. Since this is an Inklings webinar, I wanted to be very clear that not all of those authors were Inklings. So these are the only 4 Inklings members in our collections, although they did have 19 canonical members, and they also had guests that came to their meetings too. So Sayers was a contemporary, knew several of the authors, but didn't participate in meetings, and then all of them knew or influenced each other in some capacity. Our strength of collection really rests not only in print materials, and we have very strong print materials for all 7 of our authors, but for original letters and manuscript materials, we really focus on these 4 people. So Barfield, Lewis, Sayers, and Williams. We have really great collections for those 4. Our mission is to collect, preserve, and make available to the public all writings relating to these 7 authors in any format, and also to promote the interest and enjoyment of these authors through their writings, as well as other available media. So that's where the center comes into play. It's very holistic in that view. Promotion is broad as well. We host a lot of programs and events relating to our authors. This can include lectures, performances, film showings, book groups. We just launched something called the Continuing Scholars Program this fall, which allows people to get better connected to the Wade Center by attending our events, researching in our reading room and exploring our collections, as well as participating in a book group and conversation, and then kind of having a cohort of people that you get to know. And there is a virtual cohort as well as an on-site cohort. So if you're interested in that, we'll be launching another cohort next fall. That's something to keep in mind. We also have a lot of tours, and school groups and other local groups or groups from out of state come to look at our museum and use our reading room. In the publications and media sectors, we publish a journal called 7. That's an annual peer-reviewed journal, and that contains research on our authors as well as book reviews and news and events. We also have a number of book titles that we've produced over the years, including annotated editions of our authors' primary works. And I know we hope to expand that into the future. I'll be mentioning one of those titles a little later in the presentation. We also host a podcast, we run a blog, and have a YouTube channel. And you can find a lot of our programming recorded on the YouTube channel if you can't attend that in person. And what Jill and I primarily focus on with promotion is supporting scholarship and research on these 7 authors. And I love seeing a number of names in the chat already of people who have come here to research or that we know from over the years. So it's great to have everybody here. Our collections are both broad and narrow at the same time because we focus only on 7 people. So that's pretty unique. You know, Bill mentioned he had 100 different collections of varying kinds to maintain. So we really just focus on these 7 authors. However, we collect anything by, about, or related to them. So that is very broad in its scope. For primary works, we could get books, articles, pamphlets, manuscripts, and letters. Secondary works about the authors would include those same things, as well as theses, dissertations, periodicals, oral history interviews, photographs, artworks, AV collections, merchandise, you name it. So that really is an assortment and can take various forms. And, you know, I didn't think going to McDonald's to collect all the Narnia Happy Meal toys was going to be part of my job description, but that is exactly what I was doing in 2005 to make sure we had them all. So we try to get a sampling from every new era of how our authors are engaging with culture. As far as the numbers of our collections, you can see here some statistics. We have thousands of books, articles, letters, manuscripts, and then a good amount of artwork pieces, dissertations, and theses. These are always growing. Not as much in the original letters and manuscripts these days, because a lot of those have landed where they're going to be, but certainly newly published books. And I mentioned often Lewis and Tolkien, despite the fact they have passed away, they continue to publish more. So we always have to get those new editions of things coming out as well. For digitization initiatives, as we've already kind of touched on in some of the earlier presentations, it's a complicated dance between preserving materials and providing access to them, but also being very aware that they are copyrighted by other entities outside of our collection. So we're really limited on what we can put online for digital collections due to those copyright restrictions. And another thing that I really want people to understand is that when you digitize something, it takes a lot of effort to care for those materials long term. That file needs to be accessible through hardware and software that may or may not be there in 10 to 15 years. So you need to think long and hard about how you're going to maintain those digital files over time. So our current digitization priorities are our photographs and audiovisual collections, mainly because those don't last forever on the medium they are on right now. And while nothing lasts forever, paper is a lot more stable long term. So we're really trying to get material off of the photographs and audiovisual materials that might not be there tomorrow. So get those digitized today and then maintain those files long term. We would definitely like to have all of our collections digitized, at least for preservation purposes. Eventually, when we have the staffing to do that, and as Bill mentioned, that can be a challenge as well to have the time to do these things. But that is a hope long term. We do have photocopies of all of our letter and manuscript collections available for people to use on site. So that's one way that we reduce the wear and tear on our materials when they're in use at the Wade. We have a museum area as well that features the writing desks of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. It has the Lewis family wardrobe, Charles Williams's bookcases, Dorothy Sayers' eyeglasses, an original map of Lewis's Narnia by Pauline Baynes. We have a number of her original ink illustrations too for Narnia, and rotating displays on the walls. This is our reading room area. So this is where Jill and I are helping people use our materials. So you'll find at least one copy of every title by the Wade Center authors on the shelves here, although we do collect every edition of their works as well and try to get all the first British and American editions up through the modern editions too. We have secondary books about them on the shelves here, lots of theses, journals, articles, copies of letters and manuscripts. The reading room is an area reserved for reading and research on the Wade authors, and there's no fee to research, but advanced reservation is encouraged to ensure that we have availability and also to make sure that we have the materials that you want to use pulled and ready to go for you when you arrive. For a collection that is not as heavily known about or used, I wanted to focus, especially since this is Atla, the religious plays of Dorothy L. Sayers. A lot of people know her for her detective fiction, but she transitioned into writing religious dramas in 1937 with The Zeal of Thy House, which is about the construction of Canterbury Cathedral. So we have a lot of archival collections about these plays, and I'd love to see them get more use because they have fantastic material, including correspondence, sometimes even financial theater returns, programs, reviews of the dramas themselves, all kinds of cool stuff, as well as copies of the books when they were eventually published. So here are a few of those titles. I also want to mention The Man Born to be King. That's a 12-play cycle on the life of Christ that was originally broadcast on BBC Radio in the 1940s. And when that became published, C.S. Lewis actually read that every year as part of his Lenten devotional. So it has a neat connection to another one of our authors too. We have, as I mentioned before, annotated editions of our author's primary works, and Man Born to be King is one of those. This came out in 2023, edited by Catherine Weir, and it contains a lot of introductory material that can be hard to find, as well as extensive notes, helping modern readers better connect to Sayers' text and understand what she was creatively trying to do with the writing of these plays. So that's very cool to check out. I wanted to pull at least one item from these archives to highlight, and this is a telegram from an opening night performance of Zeal of Thy House at the Westminster Theatre, March 29th, 1938. You can see, I mean, this telegram is just a beautiful piece for one thing. I wish we had emails that looked like this these days. But this is from her good friend and creative colleague, Marion St. Clair Byrne. And they collaborated together on writing a play for Busman's Honeymoon. And you can see that she signs to her friend Dorothy, all good wishes from Marion Byrne. So that's just one tantalizing little tidbit from these collections to maybe entice some of you to come check these out. And with that, I'm going to transition over to my colleague, Jill, and she will tell you more about a heavily used Wade Center collection.
All right. So, as Laura mentioned, my role here at the Wade Center has a lot to do with description and access of our materials. I maintain our library catalog. I maintain kind of the order of things on the shelf. And so I get to talk about this highlighted collection because it's a collection that I've personally done a lot of work with to try to make it easier for people who cannot come to the Wade Center to understand what we have and to use this collection effectively. So this is one of our author library collections. And while the Wade Center does have some books previously owned by each of the authors we collect, our biggest personal library collection is this one, the Lewis Library Collection. And I'm highlighting this because it is one of our most used collections. And that's because Lewis frequently marked in his books. So they are a really valuable source of information on Lewis, both personally and in terms of Lewis's scholarship and kind of tracing his thinking as he was reading the books that he owned. And so pictured here are 3 of our Lewis Library titles. The one on the left, The Control of Language, is the infamous Green Book discussed in Lewis's work, The Abolition of Man, and it contains all sorts of markings and notes. So not only does seeing Lewis's copy help trace what Lewis was thinking when he was writing The Abolition of Man, see what he was actually responding to, but in this case, it also helped identify what Lewis only referred to as the Green Book in The Abolition of Man. And that's because, as you can see, it is in fact green. But that's significant because if you come across other printings of this title, you might be surprised to see that the cover is white. So this is a case where having Lewis's own copy is very important to understanding Lewis's writing. In the middle, you see Milton's Poetical Works, Volume 1, which contains the text of Paradise Lost. It's one of the most heavily annotated works in our Lewis Library collection, and it's an invaluable resource to scholars interested in Lewis's own research and scholarship, especially his work Preface to Paradise Lost. And this is one of the ways that the Wade Center also works alongside other institutions. We'll actually be loaning this book to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. for their upcoming exhibit on C.S. Lewis in the spring of 2025. This last volume, Don Juan, is more humorous than scholarly, but one of the ways that Lewis commonly marked in his books was to include reading dates when he had read the work. So often we know not only what Lewis read, but when he was reading it. And while unfortunately, due to copyright restrictions, I couldn't show you the inscription, Lewis did record a reading date in this book, but that's not all he wrote. He also paired it with an inscription of never again. So I think we can all guess what Lewis thought of this title. And because this collection is so frequently used and requested, we've worked hard to increase access and discovery to this collection, even though we really can't digitize it. Lewis's handwriting is copyright by the Lewis estate, so we have a lot of the same limitations that Bill described when he was talking about the Tolkien collection at Marquette. And one of the ways that we've tried to increase access is to use our online catalog to highlight which of Lewis's books have these kind of features that are valuable to users interested in this collection. And because we've done that identification, I can tell you that in our collection of the Lewis Library, we have about 2,500 volumes in total, 613 of which are signed, although not necessarily by Lewis. 698 are annotated. 873 have some sort of lining, either in the margins or underlining, and then 517 have marginalia, kind of less textual markings among the text. And that's not all we've chosen to highlight. And we know this because we've gone through each of our 2,500 volumes to look at these features and then added these terms to our catalog, where they are now available for patrons to see and to use as a way to browse and filter that collection online before they ever set foot in the Wade Center. And so we've defined each of these terms very carefully as a way to help users, help our readers really focus in on what they're looking for. So here's a selection of terms you'll see in our catalog records with a brief explanation of what they mean for this collection. So we have annotations, which we here at the Wade Center have decided is text of one or more sentences relevant to the content of the book. We also have marginalia, which is text of less than a sentence, so just a few words, or markings such as exclamation points, question marks, or stars in the margins. We have inscriptions, which is text of really any length, but that's unrelated to the content of the book. So these are things like presentation inscriptions, where it's like, I'm giving you this book, Merry Christmas, or, you know, an author signature that says, you know, I'm signing this book to you, or those reading dates, like in Don Juan. We've also marked or flagged books that have had insertions where something was found in the book when the Wade Center acquired it. Presentation copies where, you know, someone presented the volume to Lewis or a member of the Lewis family and the book has ended up in Lewis's library. And we have kind of also broken that down into books that have a specific presentation inscription, which is often how we can identify these presentation copies. But sometimes we're able to identify presentation copies through other manuscript material, especially letters. We've also marked author inscriptions where an author has signed not just their name, but also a message. And then of course, autographs, which are, you know, signatures. And this is where the volume is signed by Lewis or by someone relevant to the book itself, like the author, the editor, or the translator, or someone Lewis adjacent, like a member of the Gresham family or Lewis's parents or his brother Barney. We also have some other highlighted features that are a little bit more self-explanatory. And because we do have collections of personal library books from each of our 7 authors, when we were kind of deciding what we wanted to include for our users, we did try to think outside the confines of the Lewis Library and choose terms that might have relevance to other author library collections as well. And a good example of this is book plates. Lewis didn't have his own book plate, so any book plates that appear in books in his library are those of a former owner, but MacDonald did have his own book plate, and in fact, he even designed this book plate. So we want to be able to use this term in the future in the MacDonald Library to highlight books with that feature. So having done all of this description, we've also tried to find ways to make this collection easy to search within our catalog. And you can access the Wade Center's online catalog through our website on our collections page. And I can provide a link post-presentation as well. So we've set up our catalog so that patrons can choose to search just within the Lewis Library. You can see that kind of dark green box in the middle of the slide. It's got a drop-down menu on the right that says Wade Center C.S. Lewis Library. If you're searching with that selected, you're only searching for items within this library collection. And all of those terms that I just explained that you can see down the right-hand side of the slide, those work as filters. So you can do a search within the Lewis Library and then narrow that search based on whether you want a book that has annotations or is signed or maybe has those reading dates. And you can see by the box with the red check mark and the slash, you can also choose to exclude terms as well. And then finally, if you found a book that you think you might be interested in, if you look at the catalog record for that specific title, you'll see a local note that looks like this note in the middle of the screen. And that will tell you exactly where all the markings in this book are, their page numbers. So this saves users a ton of time because then when they do come to visit the Wade Center, they don't have to flip through every page of whatever book they've requested. They can reference this note and find exactly which pages have those markings. This also helps people know in advance of their visit how heavily a book is marked or annotated just by looking at the number, the length of the note there. And so while we have all of these great resources within our catalog for patrons who want to interact with this collection, one of our biggest struggles is kind of with information literacy or helping our patrons understand the tools that are available to them when using these collections and kind of helping them make sure that they're using the search strategies that we put in place effectively. So one of the ways we've tried to address this is with our Lewis Library Searching Guide. This is available as a PDF on our website on the page specifically dedicated to the Lewis Library. We also send it out as an email attachment to people who've reached out to us and expressed an interest in using Lewis Library books, or even to people who've just contacted us that we think might benefit from using the Lewis Library. We'll also typically walk users through these tools when they come here in person, and we know they'll be using Lewis Library books. So if Laura and I have made you really want to come visit the Wade Center and explore our fabulous collections, everyone is welcome. We are open 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. For the reading room, we do request that you make an appointment in advance, but we do try to accommodate walk-in visitors whenever possible. You can find more details about visiting the Wade Center on our website, which is wheaton.edu/Wade Center. And you can also reach out to Laura and I about scheduling a visit to the reading room by emailing wade@wheaton.edu. So thank you for listening. I'm going to turn it back to Atla to open the Q&A.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. Such fascinating collections you all have, and you've done a great job of interesting everyone in them, as well as making them accessible, preserving them, etc. So many thanks for that. We have a lot of questions, but before we jump into those, I just want to encourage all the panelists to have a look at the chat for the comments as well. So for our first question, and before I jump into the questions, I just want to say it's wonderful to see so many Inklings scholars present with us today. I noticed a few editors of some of the journals that we index at Atla. So thank you all for being here. And now I will ask our audience members questions in the order that they appear, either in the Q&A or the chat. So to begin with, Andrew Ferguson asks, would love to know if any archives outside of the Wade, Marquette, or Bodleian have any Tolkien letters. So does anyone would like to tackle that one?
Hi there. Yeah, I mean, Andrew probably knows that there's Tolkien archives in different locations. There's the Leeds Brotherton Library, Leeds University Library has the E.V. Gordon and Tolkien collection, so there's some material there. Letters to his publisher are still held mostly by HarperCollins, the publisher in London. And I don't think that's publicly available even to scholars. I did go to the Reading University Library when I was researching the Tolkien Maker of Middle-earth exhibition, because I thought surely there'll be some letters from Tolkien to his publisher in their archive. They have the George Allen and Unwin archive, but sadly all the Tolkien letters have been removed except for one, which are not very interesting letter. So they're they're held in the offices of HarperCollins, the publisher who's took over from George Allen and Unwin.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next question is from Danny Hunter, who asks, what have been the most effective ways you've made materials more available externally?
If I could jump in again there, I think, you know, one of the most fabulous ways was having the exhibition in Oxford in 2018, because we could just make so much material available to the public, to anybody who wanted to walk in. It was a free exhibition, and most of it was material that you couldn't see even if you came as a researcher to the Bodleian, because a lot of it was his artwork, and we don't produce that for conservation reasons. Quite a lot of it came from the family papers, which isn't available to researchers. So it was just really great feeling to get all that material and make it available to everybody in the exhibition space. And having the book that was a catalogue that contains an image of everything that was in the exhibition meant that it had sort of a life beyond the 4-month run on display.
Thanks again, Catherine. Anyone else want to address that question?
I would concur with Catherine, and I almost just say ditto what she just said. We had our own exhibition in 22, and it was a great way to be able to show some of the items in the collection, especially when it was grouped around a theme. In our case, the art of the manuscript allowed us to pull more obscure scraps and manuscript pages out from the collection, rather than the ones that kind of are always iconic and always seen everywhere, and be able to present them to the public. And the catalog was helpful for showing this. I was very grateful we were able to reproduce the entire a list of items from the exhibition in the catalog, and that's a useful source for Tolkien scholars and fans to be able to have a record of an image of what that item looks like, since publishing these manuscripts doesn't happen often.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? Okay, our next question comes from Kate Neville, who asks, is there some sort of Inkling archive which might help find Inkling works that could be part of an institution's larger collection, one that might not have a special Inklings focus?
I think it's one of the joys of archival research is that, you know, you can find something in your collection wherever you are in the world that might have a connection to Tolkien or Lewis or one of the Inklings. It might be a letter that's found its way there, or an annotated book. So yeah, it's sort of one of the pleasures of delving into archival collections. But it would, you know, all of us are involved as well in cataloging them and making the lists and descriptions of our collections more widely available. But it's always great to discover something that nobody else has.
Thank you. We have 2 questions from Roxy Wiley for Ashley. She would like to know, can you speak more about your collaborations with faculty for including primary source-driven courses? And how do you decide acquisitions? What sources do you consult to know which would add value to your collection and research needs of the university? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Roxy. As far as collaborating with faculty, I think it's really making sure that whatever we're doing aligns with the goals of the course, making sure that what we're doing doesn't feel like it's outside of the course for students, that they're not sure why they're doing archival research or why they're interacting with primary sources, but that they feel that it is connected to the other objectives that they're pursuing. So I've been approached by faculty, and then I've also approached faculty if I see a course that feels like it might be a good fit. I'll throw some ideas out, and sometimes the product we end up with is a lot different than the idea we started with. But I think it's just making sure that we're in connection and communication. And there are a couple of projects actually outside of Inklings Special Collection that we've revisited year after year to try and improve the experience for the student and the engagement with the resources. So I'm not an expert in the Inklings necessarily, but I'm an expert in the collection. And so also leaning on faculty that have that expert knowledge, their knowledge of these authors and of these materials, that they can help to even interpret them for students. And then as far as the question for acquisitions, really it's looking at, as we discover the different gaps that we have that we might fill, looking at those. One of the things that we've been working on recently is just kind of bolstering our Sayers collection with some first American editions. So recently acquired Strong Poison, which had a really cool cover. And we were really excited to grow the Sayers collection, but really just looking for the holes that we find as we work through this back end work.
Thank you, Ashley. The next question is for Bill from Dean. He asks, is there any chance for being a volunteer at the collection in Milwaukee for a non-student?
It's a good question. Yeah, that's questions come up before. I guess it's possible. It would sort of be a case-by-case basis to see what the person's expectations are. I mean, obviously, any sort of volunteer work would have to happen here. It wouldn't be a remote relationship, so it'd have to be somebody that's limited to really to somebody in the area. And I guess I'd have to meet and see what their expectations are and figure out what sort of work would be helpful for the collection here and see about that. I mean, volunteers are kind of like, they're wonderful. They can be wonderful, but they're kind of sometimes more, they take a lot of work to supervise volunteers in that. And so taking on a lot of volunteers from outside Marquette might be a challenge, but it's a conversation I'd certainly happy to have with anybody.
Thank you. And one more question for you, Bill. This one's from Joe Rick. Do you have copies of Tolkien things that you don't own? Excuse me, says the different homecoming manuscripts, for example, so that those wanting to look at Tolkien things you don't actually have in your collection could get some of that done without circumnavigation. Yeah,
we do have copies of a number of works. We don't have originals of a number of them, but we have them in copy form. Early on in sort of Tolkien studies, the early Tolkien scholars would oftentimes photocopy and freely share and pass around different items to augment each other's collections. And so there were a number of these things deposited by people like John Ratliff, a notable Tolkien scholar here to Marquette. And so we've included those in the collection so people could come and take a look at them if they wanted to.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, here's a question from Sori. Catherine, I have heard that you have a reciprocal agreement with the Marion Wade Center for the works of C.S. Lewis. If they acquire an original, they send you a copy and vice versa. Is that correct? But not for the other Inklings, right?
I think this might have been something that happened in the past, Laura, but I don't think it's happened in recent years. I mean, I'm struggling a bit here because I don't look after the C.S. Lewis collection. But I think when Judith Priestman was our curator of modern literary manuscripts, there might have been an agreement. Do you think that's still ongoing, Laura?
I don't believe it's active any longer. No. We do have a number of manuscript and letter materials that are stored at the Bodleian. You probably have some things from us as well.
Yeah.
Mainly for the purpose of helping people not have to circumnavigate the globe to see everything. That was only for C.S. Lewis. And we clearly mark when things are actually owned as originals in the Bodleian Library when we don't own those, and we don't allow any usage outside of the Wade Center on-site access. We always refer people to the Bodleian if they wanted to, say, get a reproduction of some kind, or if they needed to know where the original is housed, we always direct them over to the Bodleian Library. And we try to keep track of the shelf mark numbers and all of that too, so that it's not too much work for the archivists over at the Bodleian to then figure out which particular piece they're asking about, because you do have vast collections over there. You don't just focus on C.S. Lewis, so we try to help out where we can with that. And we're in touch with Oliver over there, who manages the Weston Reading Room and Special Collections, and direct people his way if they have questions about that. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. One more question from Joe for Catherine. Do you know when the new Walter Hooper materials will be accessible?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's wonderful because they came to us under the acceptance in lieu scheme, which means that the Bodleian didn't have to pay anything for them, and we acquired them, but we don't have any funds to process them. So that's the downside. So we don't have the funds that would pay for the archivist time to deal with them. So I think our head of manuscripts is aware that, people are very interested in the C.S. Lewis material and the Tolkien items. And I would love to get that out there, but we're going to need some funding. So I don't have an answer for that, but not in the foreseeable future, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. We have an anonymous question. I've used C.S. Lewis' voluminous literary criticism as a sort of curating process to help me identify works I might enjoy reading. How should I go about learning more about what books, especially fiction or philosophy and theology, Tolkien would recommend to others? I've read Tolkien's library and annotated checklist, but I thought the annotations in them were rather scarce.
I actually think the Tolkien's library is a really wonderful resource by Oronzo Chili, and it's just brought together all the items that he has discovered that were in Tolkien's library, top books owned by Tolkien, but he's also looked into books that Tolkien read, and books that he definitely read that he might have read. And he's put together a lot of information in one place. I think there's a lot to be gleaned from there. And of course, Holly Ordway's written a fantastic book on Tolkien's modern reading, and that gives you so much insight into works of fiction that Tolkien was reading. That's a really great, accessible book. I'd recommend it.
Thank you, Catherine. Anyone else? Okay. One more question from Sori. Are the letters between Williams and Phyllis Jones restricted, or are they available for consultation?
I believe they're available. Sorry. So you say you come into the Western Library soon. So yeah, you'll be able to order those up into the reading room and have a look at those. I think I'm right. I've got the catalogue in front of me on the other screen, and they seem to be all available.
Thank you. Okay, another anonymous question. For Laura, is it the Wade policy to have no photographs of any author's works?
So our allowance for photography in the reading room is from published materials in limited quantities. And we double check that with the archival staff just because we have so many sensitive copyrighted materials in our collections. We do not allow photography of anything that is a letter or a manuscript that is written by our authors, and there are limitations within our archival collections as well because of copyright. So it's really a case-by-case basis. If it's not written by our authors, you can check in with us, but we do check in based on what the researcher's needs are and what the material is they're requesting and how extensive that request is. We also make physical photocopies for people as well, or scans when we can. But for on-site photography by the patrons themselves, it is from published materials only.
Thank you. Okay, here's a question from Julie Botnick. I'm curious if any of the panelists have run into any issues when collecting fan-created materials, or could discuss ways they have successfully built trust with fan communities. For example, I don't collect in this topic area, but in my collecting area, I have had independent zine creators cancel orders when they see that the purchaser is a library. And I know others have experienced this sort of pushback or mistrust as well.
I can start off on that. And this gives me an opportunity to point out an individual. It's very important to Marquette's collection here. I would say that when it comes to fanzines, we're a kind of a passive collector. Rather than going out and aggressively pursuing it ourselves, we have relationships with people who are collectors. One in particular, Gary Honeywell, also known among the fandom as Hildefon's Took. He has accumulated the largest fanzine collection in the world related to Tolkien, and is still building it. And he is a donor to Marquette. So his collection, he loaned fanzines for us to microfilm years ago, and we're starting now to get some of the actual paper fanzines here, but his collection will be eventually here in its entirety at Marquette. And so people like Gary, we really rely to kind of gather that material. We're very careful with copyright with the fanzines. One of the projects I abandoned over the years because I just didn't have time was an attempt to really publish and make more accessible the fanzine literature on Tolkien. And when we were doing the project, we were very careful to double check the copyright and talk to our general counsel's office about whether we could, in fact, publish certain zines online or not. But unfortunately, that's a project that kind of has fallen by the wayside in the last few years.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? Okay, our next question comes from Kristen Bolden. Does the Wade Center have copies of C.S. Lewis copies of other Wade authors, like Sayer's Mysteries or Tolkien's Hobbits or Lord of the Rings?
We do have a few, and I'll ask if Jill has anything to add. I know we have some Sayers works. I don't really think we have any Tolkien. We do have a couple of Williams books. This is all on our website. You can easily search by author and then find exactly which copies we have of these and how heavily annotated they are. So if you have additional questions on that, you can reach out to us. Do you have anything else to add, Jill?
We do have, in the Lewis Library, he does have some McDonald books. He has some of his own books. He's got some of Chesterton's books. So because the Lewis Library is our largest collection, that's where most of the overlap is. We do have also just one random title in the Lewis Library that has Tolkien's signature on the title page, or no, the front flyleaf actually, but and we're not really sure how that ended up in Lewis's library. So we do find things like that as well.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more question from Catherine Joyce. Do any of these archives collections have opportunities specifically for students, whether undergraduate or graduate, to study and research with them?
I can start off on that. We had a question about volunteering. A lot of the ways that we can multiply our time and energy is through student workers. So we do hire students that are attending Wheaton College to work in our archives and help us with processing projects. As Bill mentioned, that's very time intensive. So we do limit the number that we can take on at any given time, but they do really help get more material available. We also have a lot of classes that come in to use the materials, either from campus itself or outside of campus, other classes that might be in a neighboring state that drive in that are researching our authors, and they'll spend half a day here using our materials, and we try to prepare that in advance to make sure we make their time as efficient as possible. We also have an internship program that we just started this past semester for one student worker to develop more material to better aid access and understanding of our authors in different capacities. So Chloe Dubois is our student this term that is in that internship role, and it takes quite a bit of understanding of our authors, which Chloe walked in the door with that already. So we were blessed to have her for that capacity, but I anticipate we'll have more students in that role in the future when we find the right fit. It's never something that we want to just try to populate without having the proper person in that capacity.
Thank you, Laura. Would anyone else like to address that question?
I'd say at the Bodleian, we don't have volunteers, not since COVID, really, not since before COVID, that we just don't seem to have the capacity to monitor and to use volunteers. We do have a program of internships from within Oxford University students. I have to say that they haven't worked on the Tolkien collection, but they have worked on other really interesting literary collections and political collections at the Bodleian. And we advertise those and we interview for them. So it's like a process of the students applying almost like for a job and then being interviewed and then getting a placement, quite a short placement with the Bodleian. But we do welcome research from undergraduate level upwards in our collections, not below that. But if you have a research need to consult the Tolkien archive, just run that by me and that will be fine.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, I've already spoke to the volunteer issue, but in terms of student researchers, it's something that I think everyone else in their presentations mentioned, but I didn't bother to say, is that people are welcome to come to do research at Marquette. Our reading room is open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4:30 p.m. We operate now by appointment only, so I'd ask people to get in touch with me in advance, email me, set up a time to come together, especially if you're going to work with the Tolkien manuscripts, because that Anduin system that we've built here, which is, I think, really made it a lot easier to study the Lord of the Rings manuscripts. It requires an individual login for each researcher. Each researcher is given a login and password, and there's also a tutorial that I give at the start on how to use the system. So an appointment is definitely necessary to do that kind of research.
Thank you, Bill. We have one last question for you, Bill, from Jenny Fratsko, who asks, have you experienced successful internships that helped you with your numerous collections?
Yeah, in the past, with Tolkien, in my time, I mean, there was some great work done on Tolkien long before my arrival, particularly one individual, Tom Santosky, who, if you want to learn more about Tom, he's an interesting character. I'll be doing giving a talk for the Christopher Tolkien Centenary a week from Saturday, and you'll hear more about Tom in those remarks. But that was many years ago. In more recent times, there have been internships. We've done internships with the Library and Information Studies program at UW-Milwaukee across town, and also through the Public History program here at Marquette. I don't know of any that have been specifically Tolkien related, but we've had great success with some other collections, people doing internships. And it's a very rewarding experience, I found, because some of these interns have then gone on to graduate school or have gone on to careers in archives or as historians. So it's really neat to interact with them and help them. I'm trying to think if anybody's really worked with Tolkien through an internship. I can't really think of anybody.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question. So once again, let's thank our presenters, Ashley, Bill, Catherine, Laura, and Jill. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. To learn more about Inklings scholarship in our databases, I'll invite you to see my blog post on this topic. I'm just dropping that in the chat right now. And as a reminder, this webinar recording will be posted in the next few days on our website. If you have any feedback, please write to us at connect@atla.com. Thank you. And that concludes the webinar.
So is it just us, or is everybody?